Soulful, passionate, stirring. These are the words most often used to describe the music of Kirk Whalum. Forged from his Memphis gospel roots and his time in the thriving Houston scene, over the years, Kirk has fostered a sound that is distinctly his. He's a Grammy Award winner and 12-time Grammy nominee. In addition to his incredibly successful solo career, he's worked with the likes of Al Jarreau, Luther Vandross, Larry Carlton, Quincy Jones, and most notably, Whitney Houston. An ordained minister, Kirk is committed to serving his community in various ways when he's not touring. He has a passion to educate young, aspiring musicians, and is currently engaged as a music professor at Visible Music College in his hometown of Memphis. He also currently serves as a member of the Gen Board of Directors. Please help me welcome to the stage and the podium my longtime friend and mentor, the amazing Mr. Kirk Whalum.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to this distinguished board, to this great president, and congratulations to these award winners and those who have been honored. What a great honor it is for me to stand before you. Just one cotton-picking minute, Mr. Holland. I do not want to interfere in the curriculum of any teacher. But next week, I have a meeting with the school board. And there are people in this community who believe that rock and roll is a message straight from the devil himself. Now, when that issue comes up, what should I tell them? Well, Mr. Jacobs, you can tell them that I am teaching music and that I will use anything from Beethoven to Billie Holiday to rock and roll if I think it will help me teach one student to love music. Isn't it fun to teach 2-5-1 progressions to 13-year-olds? It's a joy to teach the difference between the harmonic minor and melodic ascending to this bunch. It is awesome to stand in front of that middle school jazz band at their very first concert of the season, hoping that little Monica's diarrhea isn't contagious. My junior high teacher, Mr. Henning, God rest his weary soul, would retreat to his office, pull his coffee thermos out of his drawer, take a nice long swig and say, "Yeah, sad, but true." Yes, indeed. But I'm getting from Mr. Holland here that he had set his mind on imparting something a bit deeper, a bit more noble. He hints at a greater good, a loftier, wider, more profound goal, a spiritual goal, if you will, something through which he could recruit, as it were, one more soldier of love, as Sade once put it. To teach a child to love art, to love music, in essence, is to redeem, to restore, to reinvent a soul for a higher existence, to turn a person to their original calling and vocation, to, in the words of Joe Cocker, lift them up where they belong. To turn on the switch of music in a child's life is truly to make them human and to connect them with their fellow human beings in a way that lessens the chance that they will do harm to each other or harass or bully or exploit one another. And how fortunate we are to be able to ignite in a child or in a young adult the desire to reach deeper into their own souls and bring forth a part of themselves which is so very personal that no classical composer or rock and roll songwriter has the right to touch it. Teaching a child to love jazz, teaching them to improvise from their own souls, to phrase together in community, to depend upon each other for the desired outcome, which should be, at the very least, to put a smile on the face of every person who paid the price of admission, is a joy. It's as if this quote, Mr. Holland was pointing us to the soul quest of a certain Mr. John Coltrane, whose message to us so eloquently versed in his now historic liner note to the awesome A Love Supreme, challenges us to think of this music on a much deeper level, on a spiritual level. You see, it is one thing to revere and cherish an art form. This is a noble thing. But when one's goal is to impact art and culture for generations, and more importantly, to impact one's fellow man and fellow woman, the only way forward is to sow into the lives of young people a love and passion for living. And I think Coltrane would argue that a passion for life is absolutely connected to a passion for and a devotion and appreciation for a love towards the Creator himself. A love and a devotion to God. Did he just say that? Well, actually, why don't we check in with Mr. Coltrane himself on the subject? Apparently, Train felt very deeply that we humans are the recipients of something he called a bequeathal, a thing of value and beauty, a legacy, if you will, which is passed from generation to generation. And not just any bequeathal, but what he referred to as the most wondrous bequeathal. In fact, let's review the actual quote from A Love Supreme. Dear listener, all praise be to God, to whom all praise is due. Let us pursue him in the righteous path. Yes, it is true. Seek and you shall find. Only through him can we know the most wondrous bequeathal. This is how I see it. Our mission as jazz educators is to share our passion for this awesome music we call jazz. In fact, the mission is so important to us that we go out of our way to connect our students to music that was composed and performed 3 and 4 generations ago. This is our way of bequeathing to them what we consider to be beautiful and important and worth passing down. We could say that this is a good and important bequeathal. But then there is something higher than a healthy respect for and affinity for this art form we're passing on. And that something is the young souls to whom we are passing it. They are the more important thing. Hear me saying that these kids are more important than the art form itself. We want them to thrive, to be whole, to be a blessing to their generation, to be useful to them, to contribute to them something of beauty and value. So then we could say that using jazz music, and for that matter, the love of music and art in general, to make them better citizens, better friends, better husbands, better wives, better people, is a more wondrous bequeathal. But if we are fearlessly honest, and if we are faithful to the actual message of Coltrane's A Love Supreme, then we must ask, is there an even more wondrous bequeathal? In fact, the phrase he uses is the most wondrous. Now, in my neighborhood, the phrase, I ain't scared, Todd knows that phrase, is useful at this point. I know I got backup when I read the biographies of folks like Mary Lou Williams, who says, quote, this talent I have is to help people, period, unquote. Coltrane is calling us to make a connection here between the notes he has played on this recording to an appreciation and reverence for and pursuance of a devotion towards the divine creator of all things. This he calls the most wondrous bequeathal. Passing down to the next generation through our music the possibility of a renewed and vital relationship with our Creator is the thing that John Coltrane is telling us is more important than the awesome notes he and his band have just played for us. He is challenging us to make this connection between sound and spirit, between notes in a scale and ideas communicated using a musical language, between the terrestrial or temporal and the sublime or eternal. In our case, as jazz educators, he is challenging us to fearlessly venture into an area the one area that presents more awkward moments and more pitfalls than politics. So, Johnny, what do your parents think of that Trump? What do you think of the new president? Yeah, see, that's awkward. Well, that's exactly where we're called to go with the spirituality of this music. We have to go there. I believe Coltrane has issued forth a challenge to volitionally teach our kids that they should not be ashamed or afraid to make this connection between the music in their souls and their own faith traditions. He challenges us to challenge them to compose and improvise and perform with the kind of conviction that can only come from their openness to, their sensitivity to a higher purpose, a higher being. Whether Jewish or Muslim, Christian or Hindu, Buddhist or Baha'i, Shinto or Mormon, or for that matter, secular humanist, or nothing at all, but an acknowledgement of the spiritual nature of science. Train has clearly laid out the challenge for us to think of this music called jazz in spiritual terms. But wait, there's more, if you thought that sounded far-fetched. And by the way, I'm not inferring that we should turn our jazz classroom into a seminary. Neither am I saying that each of us will have the opportunity or even the desire to lead a student deeper into this very real and very important aspect of music. But what I am saying is that when given the opportunity, or when a student is curious enough to ask, we, in the spirit of the great John Coltrane and many others, should not cower from the task. And that perhaps this is a good time to do a little soul searching, a little review of our own regarding the spiritual roots of this music, and for that matter, of civilization itself. Here's my last point. I believe that inherent in Coltrane's mandate to us on this deeply spiritual level is the challenge for us not just to think of this music in spiritual terms, but to see John Coltrane as a black man, living and creating in a time where his spirituality was as much escape as inspiration, as much catharsis as creativity, as much self-healing as artistic innovation. Enough of this talk of being colorblind. Let us be about the honest and courageous business of first acknowledging, then addressing, then working hard to change the circumstances which yet persist in this country that yield the kinds of outcomes where our classrooms are more segregated, more economically stratified, more unequally represented in terms of hard resources than at any other time in our history. We need more soldiers of love. Mary Lou Williams once said, quote, "Jazz grew up on its own here in America. It grew out of the work songs and the psalms of the black people here. Black Americans don't have to go back to Africa to get their dignity. They've got it here," unquote. But then Mary Lou expressed her concern that, quote, "These sounds that I'm hearing now are turned in from love and away from God." Dave Brubeck once referred to jazz as the music of freedom. You see, Brubeck put his money where his mouth was. He fearlessly insisted that black musicians in his band were treated with the exact same respect and deference as himself, during a time when a stance like that surely cost him something. Same hotels, same dressing rooms, same entrances, same everything. And he further explained how that the improviser stands on par with and equal to any man or woman because she or he expresses their own story in their own musical dialect from their own heart, the notes piercing through the inequities and prejudices of the day. In the improvisatory moment, all are equal, and we are made better by hearing each other's stories. And in the same way, we must view the essence of this music in its original context. Let us not do violence to the musical legacy of this great art by ripping it from the womb without respecting and acknowledging and teaching its true spiritual and ethnic origins. Jazz was and is, and on some level will forever be, the music of social justice, the music of brotherhood and sisterhood, the music of fairness. The schools which a John Coltrane would have naturally attended were by definition lacking by every measurable metric and by every reasonable standard. This has not changed. Private and many charter schools continue to dwarf neighborhood public schools when it comes to the kinds of programs and resources that the average poor kid like John Coltrane can access. And when we're done passing out vouchers, there will yet remain a preponderance of gifted kids with no access to what they need to thrive. This is not okay. The very heartbreak out of which John Coltrane and so many others of his comrades of color created this music must be revisited and re-examined in such a way that turns the rudder of this colossal ship into waters that are more just, more sensitive to the other, more proactive towards those who are on the margins of society. Or we will absolutely miss, if in fact we have not already done so, the next John Coltrane. The most wondrous bequeathal. We all know the definition of insanity. To do the same old thing in the same old way and expect a different result. Preserving and promoting the art of jazz, teaching good, solid technique and listening skills is indeed a good and noble thing. It is more than worthy of our time and passion and investment. It is a very good bequeathal. However, sowing into the life of a young person in such a way that she becomes a more humane, more empathetic, more community-minded, more caring and loving person is a wondrous bequeathal. An excellent and glorious thing to pass on to the next generation. But causing a young person to reconsider what it is to be thankful, to be worshipful, to be reverent, to connect what is in their hearts to their family faith traditions, to the faith traditions of their global neighbors, even those called immigrants, is just short of magical. It is in many ways miraculously. Intentionally nurturing in a young musician an openness to the spirituality of music, to its natural connection to the creator, creativity, creator, it's right there in the name. Telling the truth about folks like John Coltrane and Mary Lou Williams and Duke Ellington and Dave Brubeck and Chet Baker and so many others. Not being ashamed to allow them to actually be who they were. Volitionally nurturing this knowledge and passing it on takes great courage. Isn't it funny how we don't mind telling the kids all the old tales of heroin habits and debauchery? But when it comes to being honest about these giants' quest for God, their spirituality, their deep faith, their gratitude to the Creator, the most wondrous bequeathal we can pass on to them is to teach them that though we may have many doubts and fears of our own in this area, that we don't know everything. That the lofty place from which we all make artistic withdrawals each time we put on a Billie Holiday record or play a Charlie Parker lick is a place of which we are most unworthy. It is a place of fierce honesty and of deep searching for God, for meaning, and for our place in this world. We must tell them the truth. That though we may fumble at articulating it, we do realize that there is more to jazz than virtuosity. That there is more to life than material gain or accomplishment. We must selflessly and with great vulnerability pass on to them all the most wondrous bequeathal. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Thank you. That's beautiful.
Mr. Kirk Whalum.